Hi everyone, my name is Pooi Ling Cheong. So I'm the OSPO lead for Lloyds Banking Group.
Hi everyone, my name is Dean Clark. I work for Red Hat. I'm a platform catalyst and I specialize in talking about InnerSource and cultural transformations.
So we are here to share with you what we have been doing in the InnerSource space within the bank. So Lloyds Banking Group is a household name in the UK, but outside the UK, I appreciate that it's not as well known. So in the UK, if you see a black horse, then you know it's us, but outside the UK, we are not as well known. So I thought I will give you a bit of introduction about our organization. So we are the largest UK retail bank, big customer base. Most of them are digitally active. So as of last year, we have over 5 billion log-on, which translates to about 26,000 log-ons per second. So bottom line, we have a huge digital presence and digital transformation is at the heart of our agenda. So in fact, our transformation journey started back in 1968 when we first put computers in our branch network, and 4 years later, we have our first ATM. So Lloyds also has a very strong heritage throughout the 250 years of history. There's a lot of mergers, acquisitions, and if you're from the UK, you probably would know the most recent one is the takeover of HBOS by Lloyds TSB, and then a few years later, we sell off TSB. So we have quite a big organization, and then on top of all this organizational change, we have quite a fairly complex organizational design. And so you have silos. Silos are unavoidable. And as a result of that, we do have quite a lot of reinventing the wheel, duplication of efforts that we have seen across the organization. So I am, of course, not the first one to notice that. So a lot of engineers have noticed that. And so there has been an effort to create reusable components, reusable libraries and frameworks, and teams try to share that and drive an adoption so that we can have a bit more standardization, we have more reusability within the bank. So this is what has been happening. So you have a team which say, you know what, I'm going to kind of build some reusable stuff, for people to use. And then you then come along, have a team that say, you know what, I am actually missing a blue block. So they thought, okay, oops. Great, I'm actually going to take it from here. I can use it. The only thing is that, I need to make some tweak. I need to make it blue. So they will then go and tell the team that has created this to say, can you actually make it blue for me? And they're like, yeah, sure, but it will take a certain number of times, which is not going to work for the consuming team. And the next thing is that both the bosses are involved. So she's going to tell him to say, you know what, we need this now, but it's just not going to happen. We can't meet the deadline. And he is then going to talk to his boss and say, well, we actually need this. And she is going to tell him to say, well, why can't you actually do it for them now? And then he's going to answer that. She's going to go back to him. And then he's going to tell her, say, well, it's just not going to work. So usually when this happens, what is likely going to happen is that they're going to build a blue block themselves. So whether it's from scratch, whether they're taking it from what the brown team has done and then make it into blue, regardless, there is just going to be a new thing that has come out, which is pretty much same, but just slightly different in terms of color or feature. And that is not going to be a silo incident. So what you then end up having is a variety of blue cubes. There's a variety of cubes, right, in different colors, different shapes, different sizes that's happening. So even though the intention of sharing something, driving reusability is a good intention, unfortunately, it has not solved the original issue of fragmentation that we have. So what could have been a better way is if we have enabled the blue team to build the blue cube themselves and then allow them to contribute it, and then the other side is happy, the bosses do not have to be involved. So that is what we have looking at, and we have been trying to experiment with InnerSource for the past 6 months. So we work with first use case. So we have 2 use case teams. So the first project team is our web framework team. So they have built a web SDK which contains all the components that a team can use to just spin up a single page application quickly. So we kind of estimated that it will save you about anything from 1 sprint to about 2 months. So it's quite popular, and people go like, yeah, no, why not, right? It's going to save me time. So once you started adoption, then the requests come in to say, you know what, I actually needed to be a bit different. I wanted to actually build in some stuff. So which are all good news for the team, until there are a bunch of requests coming in. So as they have described it, they are a victim of their own success. So their capacity has not increased. It's still the same number of developers, but they can't cope with the influx of requests coming in now. And they have become their own bottleneck for people to adopt their framework. So we thought, okay, so great, this is a good use case for InnerSource. Let's see how we can implement, what we can implement as far as the InnerSource practice to help you resolve this. And when we're doing that, the main challenge that we have seen is around a product ownership, a product roadmap, where the PO say, you know what, happy with some of them, but these are not the things, these are not the features that I want in my roadmap. So there was a bit of a pushback from the PO. So what we helped them to come up with as a solution is this concept of a add-on repository. So you have the core, which is the original SDK, where the product owner has full control over it. And then all the inner sourcing, the development from the community level happens in the add-on repository. So as the features matured, it will then take one of the two paths. The first one, either it gets absorbed into or merged into the core repo via your usual pull request, or your add-on components are now transformed into a module which you can consume externally by the core. So as to which path it takes, it will depend on the discussion and the agreement between the core team and also the community. So if the product owner decides, this is something that I think it fits with our roadmap, I actually want to maintain it going forward, then it goes into the core. So that's what we have done for them. And to date, they already have 2 features that have been developed by the community, which is not going to get developed or so fast or at all if we haven't gone down the inner sourcing route. So it's a great success story for us. And then in terms of our second use case team, it is a share library. It's a share library that's being used by different teams within a certain business area. So what they have is, there is a code base, and if a team wants to use it, what they will do is that they will fork the code base, and then whatever changes that they want, they will make it within their own team. So come along team 2 and say, I actually need to use this share library. So they create another version of it, and they put in their features, and the same thing with team 3 and team 4. So some of these features may be the same things that they want. Some of them might be different, but regardless, now the business area has different versions of this share library. And the biggest issue that we have with this use case is that there is actually no ownership of the initial code base. So you have issues about, we actually don't have a way to manage all these forks. We don't know how to reuse the features. Documentation is outdated, and basically the initial code base is just not properly maintained. So we approach them and say, look, there are some things that we can do. We can draw in from, what we have seen in the open source community. We can bring some of those good stuff in here. But first thing first, before we do anything, we need to sort out the ownership problem. So we told them, okay, look, we need to decide, having some a PO, at least a PO, and a maintainer, a community of maintainers, where they will be reviewing, prioritizing, and merging pull requests into it. And then once we have that, then we can start to think about what we need to do around the pipeline, what we need to do around contribution guide, and so on and so forth. Now, unfortunately, this is where our second use case stopped, because the teams come back and say, there's just more important stuff that we have, so we are not going to revisit, we are not going to look at this, but we'll revisit later when we have time. So that's the story of our 2 project teams. So over the past 6 months, from the experiment with these 2 teams, and also from a lot of conversations that we have with other teams, we have learned a few lessons. The first one is what we call a frozen middle layer. So when we first speak to the engineers, they were excited. They were like, great, we can collaborate, we can contribute. We speak to the directors, they were like, that is the right thing, to go for the bank. But somehow when you go level down, another second level down, that's just where everything stops. And it's something that we kind of anticipated, because for other initiatives that we've done, we have noticed that it tends to be the middle layer that is the breaking point, because there are the accountable people for delivery. So when pressure comes, when deadline hits, things like inner sourcing is usually what they choose to deprioritize. And we have actually seen that in our second use case. The second one is around a culture, an open source culture, where we want people to contribute. So again, engineers are hard pressed for time. But in addition to that, there is also this whole thing around psychological safety. So they are happy to contribute, but the moment you ask them to put their name next to the contribution, they're like, no, it's all right. I'll give you the ideas, but you guys can do whatever you want. And they do not want to have their name on it. So that is something that we are trying to see what we can do maybe around gamifications to encourage more contribution. The third one is just generally a lack of understanding of InnerSource. So some of the teams that would think that if you have a marketplace or some sort of a portal and you share your projects and you drive the adoption of it and you get people to reuse stuff, that is InnerSource. But that's actually only part of the story. And we have also seen that there seems to be a concern around safety when it comes to InnerSource. One of the directors actually challenged us and she said, how can I have the assurance that what the engineers, who is not from my team, put into my code base is not going to break something in production? And I think that is what makes her apprehensive about going inner sourcing. And I think that sort of concerns are legitimate because she will be answerable if anything breaks, on internet banking. But I don't think it's a valid concern because I think there's things that we can do around the governance, around contribution guide, around pipeline. But it just showcases that we still have quite a lot of work to do in terms of helping people to understand how do you do inner source and really what are the benefits that you're getting from it. The next one is around the difference in mindset. So I mean, don't get me wrong, I used to work with a PO. I used to have a counterpart PO, right? So I thought, I get them. So I went in and said, you know what, InnerSource, you get free stuff, you don't have to pay anything from your budget, there's just people working for free for you. So what I did not expect was a PO turning around and say, you know what, it's not about the free stuff. I have to maintain this thing. It's still going to come up from my team's time to maintain that. I do not want the free stuff that you're offering me from InnerSource. So I think that is a perspective I think personally I have not seen. And I think different POs will have different perspective. I think it's something that we have learned that we have to fully understand what are their concerns so that we can evaluate that and we can address and we can assess and convince them that InnerSource is the right thing for them. So the next one is around champion. So it's a term that is used quite widely in Lloyds. But I think after this past 6 months, I have got a better appreciation of what a champion could do for us. So with the second use case team, when we first talked to them, they completely get it. They were excited about it. So we thought, great, we have a champion. She's bringing it to her team. She's, getting us to go and talk to them about InnerSource. But when we start having this whole frozen middle layer, when we get challenged about time, she was still helping us, but in what I would call a best effort capacity. So with the first use case team, we actually get a bit of that challenge as well. But we had a champion who really, really believed in InnerSource. So he worked with us, he reasoned with the PO, he worked with us to talk to his leads and say, why we should be pushing and driving this, why we shouldn't stop this. So I think from both the use case team, I've seen what a fully, truly converted champion can really help us unblock versus someone who go like, yeah, I get it, I'm excited by it, but it's not really a true champion per se. And the last thing is around ownership. So on ownership, I think the concern that I always have is on how willing is a team willing to share. So a lot of teams will go like, we built this, we make this thing a success, and now you want me to InnerSource it. So why should I be wearing this badge of honor on your chest? So that is quite a common thing. But what we have seen in the past 6 months is that the reverse is true. Like in the second use case, when you talk about share ownership, they go like, okay, I'm not quite sure if I want to own this. And in fact, one of the engineers who was considering to InnerSource this project is struggling. And the challenge was that the consuming team do not actually want to own the project together with him. Because the moment you talk about share ownership, it surfaces all sorts of problems like budget. Like, you get funded. Am I going to get a slice of your budget if I were to go into a share ownership model with you? So it started surfaces all these things which we have not considered. So, even though our marks or score for our experiment is 50%, we have one success and one fail. But I think what we have done, I think it has given us a lot of food for thought about what we should do if we want to continue driving InnerSource within the bank. So I'm going to hand over to Dean now to also share his thoughts, his reflection on what we've done.
Thank you. So we like to look at this, and first, I think it's fair to say it's a fantastic opportunity that we've had as Red Hat to be partnering with Lloyds on their experimentation towards InnerSource. It is a journey. It's definitely a hypothesis, and the best thing to do with a hypothesis is to validate it. So we like to think of the concept of the community garden. If we think about open source projects, it's as beautiful as it is, it needs some structure to it. You know, if you're going to open source or you're going to create a community garden, who do you invite? Who participates? Do you keep that to a selective few initially, and then do you scale it? Or do you invite everyone? So this kind of ideation and thinking really helps us, you know, contextualize some of the cultural challenges that we face as part of adopting InnerSource. Whether it's a garden or any kind of InnerSource initiative, I think 4 key tenets really apply: community, contribution, collaboration, and communication. And with all those 4 in place, we actually get context. And if we're able to give the engineers and the teams and those interested parties and stakeholders the context that they need to then drive this innovation going forward, we should expect to see much better outcomes and adoption and buy-in from the start. With any good garden, I think it's great to have an analogy as well. So if you're in a garden, you're more than likely going to see a spider. And we like to talk about spiders as this amazing pattern that we see in nature and how the spider goes about spinning its web. So if you've ever seen a spider spin the web, it's quite mesmerizing. So there's patterns that begin to emerge. And we see this with regards to the cyclical process that we go through with the experimentation in InnerSource as well. So as the spider starts to trap the prey, she starts to then, you know, reinforce parts of the web, which may be either, you know, structurally non-integral or, you know, needs more reinforcement, etc. So these excellent examples really help guide our thinking with regards to the approach that we take and the patterns that we see. And although the web looks really complex in its later stages, I think from its initial creation, it's very simple in how the spider goes about doing it. The spider will often anchor a number of points, spinning a web, but then she'll use the wind to determine the direction of travel that she then approaches. And it's very similar to the journey that we take with InnerSource. You know, there's a number of strategies and potential areas of, you know, experiments and hypotheses that we want to tackle, but we need a starting point. And using that to then drive and iterate is really important going forward. So once the spider's attached and the anchor's there, we start to see moving through various different elements of guiding principles. So from a garden perspective, you know, you need to have some kind of alignment. You need to have a sense of urgency to get people engaged and motivated in wanting to drive this change, and also creating that coalition. So community is everything. It's not a technical problem. It's building a community around driving this change forward, and that's true in any sense. So if they're able to then follow the wind and start to iterate around what this is actually showing us and how we can then start to, you know, demonstrate key success factors, what we then find is that we start to, as we've built the community or instantiate the community, we have concepts around, you know, what is the thinnest viable platform for a SCM, for example. So where do we store our code? How open is it? Who do we select to participate in it? All of these questions help drive that initial experimentation. Much like with Lloyds, we decided very quickly that we wanted to start small. We can't do this so big because we want to limit the factors to determine whether or not we're spinning the web in the right areas. So we selected 2 use cases, one of which had a strong champion in, one of which didn't. And, you know, it's clear to see that, you know, maybe additional focus on the community and therefore creating more champions might be an effective strategy to gain more adoption across the initiative. So as the spider then continues to spin the web further, what we've then done is we've demonstrated, you know, integrity in terms of the approach that we're taking. The web is obviously getting a little bit more structurally sound. We may have seen some prey who've landed in there, and we might start to see those quick wins. What we can use from that as well is we can create a sense of gamification. So if we want to adopt or prove some of the previous cycle's success, we want to gamify that engagement with other interested parties in the community and see if we can drive that additional contribution going forward in that way. And then as we fall into that more regular rhythm, it's really important to start thinking about some of the most tangible challenges that we will face as we talk about seeking adoption from different teams. So do we continue to prioritize features over technical debt? Hopefully the answer is no. We need to have that rich community around this product, a governance and, you know, some kind of structure and vote and decision-making process that is asynchronous enough to continue at scale, but really takes into consideration the holistic service in itself as opposed to the new shiny stuff that keeps coming, which is important to drive that going forward. We also start to think about what additional CI/CD and additional checks we might put in place as we scale that contribution out beyond the initial team, because trust is always a big thing. You know, if I've built something, I trust myself to keep it going if I need it. However, if someone else is touching it, I might be a little bit more cautious around that. And one of the effective ways of mitigating said doubts is to have a really robust automated process to determine when the change has gone in, it's met the criteria and the guidelines and all of the important elements with regards to that change. After another cycle of innovation, we recommend continuously focusing on reflection as well. You'll notice the web has started to change shape somewhat, so that's where we've actually identified challenges in certain areas, so we actually need to reinforce some of those. We might have seen some friction from other teams, but because we're working in a way that everyone's behind this initiative and the collaboration in the community, we have a more stronger voice with regards to making sure that we are doing everything that we can. Again, I touched upon reducing that toil even further, so the more that we can show fixes from other teams coming in as contribution, that is also a valid contribution in itself. So if we can continue in that space, we've built in additional trust and reliability within the system. What's really important here as well is that we can't lose sight of the business advantage that InnerSource is bringing. So as Pooi mentioned, the ability to elevate your capability and your engineering to focus on meaningful work as opposed to duplication of effort, it's really going to be powerful in order to achieve your digital aspirations. But muscle memory is really, really quick when it snaps back into place. So as soon as there's a challenge, as soon as there's some kind of failure, we see teams then going back and doing the things they've done before because it's a known path. We want to continually reinforce this from a high-level business perspective to make sure that the vision is still clear. So the spider's almost finished with the web now. We might even start to call it enterprise. So we do think there's something that we can go out and champion and be passionate about what this is bringing. But we also, again, we kind of need to reiterate the importance of kind of maintaining that cultural element, because I think there's a theory in thermodynamics that effectively everything, if left unchecked, will descend to chaos. So we really need to continue this iteration and use the community to drive the behaviors that we've cultivated out of this, because those are the most important things you can achieve with an InnerSource project. You really want to change behaviors, and you want to have teams collaborate and co-communicate together. Added some color in there for the nice final slide. So just to close out, it's, again, really been a pleasure working with Pooi and the team on what this means from a transformation perspective. I think we've all been reflective and we've understood that there's been some success, there's been some challenges, but I think we've really identified a number of anchor points now where we can go back and reiterate and start to work on what this means as to reinforce that strategy going forward. So community collaboration, communication, and contribution really brings in that new context. And once that new context is set, you're going to have a really clear vision that teams can actually start to influence that change going forward. So my takeaway from this presentation is that culture is everything. It's never a technical problem. It's all about creating a community and enabling people to drive this going forward. I'll pass back on to Pooi for the final slide.
So where do we go from here? So our OSPO was formed only about 7 months ago, and it came into being primarily because of a governance need. So one of the concerns that we have been having is that would engineers start to see us as just a compliance house, right? So, and in fact, last week when I went to speak to a team who is heavy users of open source with the intention to help, one of the first things he asked me was whether was I there to tell him that what he has been doing, he shouldn't be doing and he should stop. I was like, look, mate, I'm not here to shut anything down. I actually want to help your engineers to innovate faster, but doing so in a confident manner, so that when they explore a certain open source technology, they don't have to do that with that uncertainties looming their head about, okay, is this right? Am I going to get in trouble? Is CISO going to come and speak to me 2 weeks later? So that's actually what we want to do. And I think there's a lot of talks about, we need to catch our management attention. And usually we do that, right? But because there is a compliance issue. So I'm like done with catching their attention. I want to catch their excitement, right? They should be excited about things that we are doing in OSPO, right? The things that we're doing should be exciting, it should be inspiring. So I think to bring InnerSource in and open source together and adding that whole developer experience perspective is going to help us achieve that. So when we can start to create what we call a modern engineering nirvana, where you have collaboration, there is openness, there is optimized workflow and processes. That is when our engineers will start to see OSPO as a friend, as a partner in their transformation journey. So thanks for coming to our talk.
Thank you very much. There is some time for questions if anyone wanted to follow up with questions. Feel free.
I'm curious how much a CTO organization should be putting into this, such as like creating a centralized team to actually take ownership of some of these projects, especially as the teams that originally developed them, let's face it, orphan them like after 3 years all the time. Like everyone orphans their projects eventually, but some of them, but the rest of the bank comes to depend on them. So like where does the CTO organization come in? Can it take ownership of these things? Should one be put in that direction?
Do you want to take that or should I?
Let me formulate my answer, and you answer that first.
From my perspective, I think it's really important. We all talk and we hear the hype around platform engineering. I think platform engineering aims to provide common reusable services to reduce the cognitive load and enable teams to do things that actually add value. With that is obviously a challenge because you've also then got the concept of someone building something and then you're taking ownership of it. So we like to look at it from a recommoning perspective, using InnerSource to really catalyze that via the collaboration, etc. But the more we can create the ability for teams to adopt new services effectively, i.e. through ownership and or contribution in build, the more able we're going to be able to achieve that platform engineering sweet spot. And from a CTO's perspective, I think it's really important that we focus around the strategy around this, treating it as a product, treating the teams as like a centralized capability that's going to add significant value, setting that vision and mission for that transformation that's going to be needed. I think it's really, really important. And I think InnerSource can really catalyze the thinking needed to adopt the new practices as well.
So if you're talking about project that's been created and then has been used by other teams, whether should CTO spin up a central team to look after them? I don't think that is the right move. So if the project has been orphaned and nobody wants it and nobody cares that it has been shut, then it just means that that project is no longer needed in the bank. But if a lot of teams started to have a dependency on it, then I think I will question why the original team would have been shut in the first place, right, and not get budget to continue with this project. And if we keep on spinning central teams in CTO to maintain and absorb a project that's been built, I don't think that is a very interesting role that is going to attract a lot of engineers to apply. I think engineers love to create stuff. They like to maintain stuff. They like to have ownership on things, and they like to explore new stuff, right? So I think spinning up a team just to absorb all these things that nobody wants to look after, it just sounds very wrong to me in many levels. I think whoever has created that, if they feel there's still value to pursue it, then yeah, they should be maintaining it. That's my view.
You didn't mention, but maybe it's part of it. That's why I want to ask. You see also InnerSource projects as a first step before open sourcing your software?
That's a really good question.
So I spoke to Claire this morning, Claire Dillon. She asked me the same thing, right? And I told her, I said, when we look at, so Mark over there, he is my boss, he's at the back there. So when we first look at InnerSource end of last year, we did actually put investment in it with the intention that someday we can publish our own open source project. At the moment, we don't have a way to do it. So we thought we'll do InnerSource so that there's a precursor to that. Then over the past 6-7 months of us doing it, I have come to the conclusion that no, it doesn't have to be, right? We can probably have a very successful InnerSource practices within the bank, and we never publish our own open source. And there was still so much value that we can gain out of doing InnerSource. Yeah, so my view has changed. If you asked me 6 months ago, I'd say, yes, that will be why we do it. But now I don't think it's...
But is that because of what you're doing, the actual work, or it's because there's no motivation to make it like that?
No, I think there has been a team that's asked us, right, to say, can we actually publish our project in GitHub, right? Is there a way for us to do it in the bank? So there are some appetite. I wouldn't say a lot, but there has been teams that has been asking about this. But it's just that I've seen this as two separate things now. I've come to realize that, okay, InnerSource is one thing. If you can do it and make it great, fine. If it actually leads to us publishing open source project, that is great. But it doesn't have to be, their fate doesn't have to be joined together.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, looking into the Lloyds setup, I think it's really inspiring to see the OSPO office managing and maintaining both open source and InnerSource strategies. I agree with you, it doesn't necessarily have to have a dependency, but what is really interesting is you start to mature and go through these growth cycles. You take the best from there and the best from there. And that one can also reinforce your ability to ask the right questions in the open source space and vice versa in InnerSource. So I think having a collective view over the strategy overall is a good thing to help reinforce some of those behaviors. Any more questions? Or thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.